So my name is Dean, and I've come all the way from the UK, from London specifically, to talk here. So I just want to say thank you to Liz and the whole Juicy team for the invite. I spoke at the Manchester conference. No, I didn't, sorry. I was on a panel on the Manchester conference, and then I spoke at the London conference last year, and I had a blast. And I am here to share some of my experience. And on the flight over, I was thinking about, okay, who's in the audience? Who's going to be here? Who am I going to be talking to? Because I'm a little bit nervous about whether the content that I have is going to land appropriately. So just on a show of hands, how many operators do we have here? Oh, shit. Okay, so it's predominantly operators. How many suppliers and people who provide services to co-working operators? Okay, not a lot of you guys. And then how many people who are just kind of hey, co-working, I heard about this thing, I got some spare cash, I'm gonna turn up. Just one. Nice. Okay, and then the second thought I had on the flight, so predominantly operators, this is good. The second thought I had on the flight over was, this is actually me going full circle. So 12 years ago, almost to the day, it was May 3rd, I started my first foray into the world of co-working, and I started to design my first co-working space, and that was in Boston. Anyone who knows Boston, it was in the Fort Point district. So it was Melcher Street. It was for a startup at the time called WeWork. And so I'm going to share my experience over the last 12 years with you today, and hopefully help you think about how we can create the next generation of co-working. Spoiler alert, I don't know. So let's talk about it. And to start with, I'm going to say this isn't going to be a typical design talk about finishes and color choices and how to make your space more wellness orientated and things like that. I didn't travel all of this way to tell you a bunch of stuff that you probably could have generated using AI. In fact, I thought I would do that for you. So I typed in our AI overlord, and I said, how do you design a co-working space? And these words were what the prompt came back with. And I was going through this and I was thinking about, okay, AI is how we all seem to accessing the world's knowledge at the moment, right? And I know you were warned about not using AI bots, and I was sitting down thinking, what does that mean? Is it recording? Or anyway. And so as a proxy, I thought this would be a good indication of what the broad market, maybe some of you guys, are thinking about how to design a co-working space. You need natural light, ergonomic furniture, acoustics, good lighting, plants, etc. Sure. So then I thought, let's go a little bit further on this. So I went down the AI rabbit hole and I tried Mid-Journey. Show of hands, who knows Mid-Journey? Okay, so not a lot of you compared to how many co-working operators here. So Mid-Journey, for those who don't know, is a text prompting tool. So you type in a bunch of text and it will generate an image for you. So I thought I would ask the same how-to question. How do you design a co-working space? And these are the images that it came back with. So I know, just shout it out. What do you guys think? Anyone could just say anything. Is it good? See a few nodded heads. No, some are indifferent. They're not bad. Considering it took me 30 seconds to prompt and generate, I would say they're not bad, right? Okay, here are 3 other co-working spaces. Now, do you guys recognize any of them? Those who can see? No? Does anyone see anything that they all have in common? Shout it out, shout it out. Natural light, plants, texture, soft seating, windows, soft seating again. Cool. So it sounds like, and this was an experiment that I thought I would try. You all kind of said what the AI said. Natural light. It didn't quite say soft seating, but you get the point. Well, on the left-hand side, you have WeWork. In the center is Industrious. And then on the right-hand side is the office group, currently known as Fora. And they're all beautiful, right? Is that fair to say? Is that? Okay, cool. And I'm sure they're all functional, right? I haven't been to any of these particular locations, but I'm guessing that they all work, considering they're three of the bigger players in the market. And some companies, some of you might be smaller operators, and some of you might be larger operators. You might have multi-locations across different areas in your city, your town, or whatever. And I'm sure you might spend different budget amounts on different spaces, and you might invest heavily in certain amenities. All of that is cool. But broadly speaking, the AI-generated advice is present in all three of these, and I'm sure they're present in all of yours. So well done. The point is, functional and beautiful design spaces are just table stakes. Like, the market has matured to such an extent, and the sheer number of you that are here proves that everyone has kind of leveled up. Everyone knows what to offer the basics as far as co-working is concerned. It's no longer a differentiator. It's no longer how you stand out. To me, it's merely the starting point. And you might be thinking, well, who am I to say that? So, as in my introduction, I spent the last 12 years designing and delivering co-working spaces all over the world, from here in Boston 12 years ago, New York, I did launch London, China, Japan, India, Southeast Asia, Sydney, and a few other places in between. And along the way, I saw firsthand how when you develop something new and novel, how people respond to that, and how you can capture the imagination of a new community and drive a business forward and scale it forward. So I joined WeWork. It was a team of about 5 designers. I think I was like the 6th designer, and then the design team scaled to like 500 plus globally. And this was when the company had about 5 offices across the US, so New York, San Francisco, LA, and a few other places I can't quite remember off the top of my head. And my girlfriend at the time, my wife now, was living in New York. And she had a legitimate kind of L2 visa where she transferred from her UK company. She was living in New York. And I flew over May 2013 to visit her. And I met this guy called Devin Vermeulen. And Devin was employee number 5 at WeWork, and he was the first designer. And me and him were just talking about music and DJing and production and stuff like that. And then he said, oh, you're kind of cool. You should meet Miguel. And so I came to Varick Street in Soho, New York, and I met Miguel. And I was on a visit to visit my girlfriend, now wife. And so Miguel nonchalantly flicked through my portfolio. I had like this A4 book, and he was flicking through it. And he's like, oh yeah, it's kind of cool. We got this project coming up in Boston. We'd like you to start, but you need to start next week. I was taken aback by that. And I said, yeah, but I'm sure, but how? How am I going to get paid? And how is any of this going to work? Because I'm from London, I don't have a visa, etc. And I'm telling you guys this story because it gives you a sense of what I later learned, which then the world later learned. These guys fought in a slightly different way. And I want to share some of that with you today to give you some kind of color and context around how co-working went from those dimly lows to those scaled heights. And he said to me, he was texting on his phone. And I said, yeah, I'm not sure how this is going to work. And then obviously he was texting someone. And then this lady came in, and I later found out that she was an assistant in the business, but she was also a trained immigration lawyer. And she came into the room, and then she said, and they were kind of like sizing me up almost. And then she said to me, marry your girlfriend. And I was like, what? No, whoa, too soon. And she said, that's the way. You're going to get a visa, you're going to get the spouse visa, and it's all good, and everything will be rosy in the garden. And I said, whoa, all too soon. In the end, I flew back to London, and a phrase was uttered by Miguel, which came to become synonymous with how we operated, was, we'll figure it out. And we did figure it out, and I became a consultant, and etc. Long story short. And I'm telling you that story because, as I said, it was the first time I experienced this directness and openness and vulnerability almost to say, like, hey, we don't quite know everything, but we're going to figure this out. And so, as I said, I'm going to share some of that with you. And today I'm here to ask a bigger question. What else can we do to create the next generation of co-working? Because if we're going to move things forward, we need to think beyond the look and feel, beyond the finishes that you're going to put in your space. Because as I said, that's no longer a differentiator. We need to start to think, and beyond the desk as well, we need to start thinking what truly makes people want to be in these spaces. And in my experience, the combination of elements, when you place things together, different experiences, different walks of life, that's what creates and solves the problem of a particular time. So I want you to keep in mind that iteration leads to innovation, which equals progress, okay? So we iterate first, and that's what leads to something new, maybe. And that is the progress that we all should be seeking. And so in order to move the market forward, I think we need to have a firm grasp on where we are today, where we have been, in order to iterate effectively. And even though co-working, and I think the show of hands at the beginning demonstrates this, is now quite popular, if you like. But today and traditionally, the office, which co-working is a part of, has been a symbol of productivity, efficiency, and corporate profit. A commodity of sorts of the commercial real estate institution. But when you study and look at the history of how the office evolved, you realize that that's just a 20th century mindset, and it's terribly outdated. I guess bad habits or old habits become bad and slowly die hard. And why am I saying that? Because all legacy systems are being disrupted. I'm sure you all can feel it around technology's kind of constant growth. And I think next up is the traditional office. And when you think of an office, when you think of a skyscraper, you tend to think wall-to-wall glass, and it just oozes office space, right? And co-working really is still largely tethered to that institution and that sector of the office. So in order for us to think about what co-working can become, we have to also think about the office as a broader sector. We can't separate ourselves from it. I want to take you down memory lane and talk a little bit about where the offices come from so that we can start to think about where we can go next. And it starts from 1900 to 1950. I call this the birth of the modern office. So those of you who are familiar with Taylorism, is anybody familiar with that term? Oh, one person. Okay, so this is a little bit of a history lesson, History Channel settings. And so the concept of Taylorism was, how do you take the first industrial revolution into the new world at that time? And so you would have rows of the same workers all facing the same direction of a supervisor. And they would all be working on widgets. So you can think of Henry Fordism. This is the repetitive nature of the economy at that time. And so the office was a reflection of that. So you went from the factory floor to what became the factory office. And that is the birth of the modern office. And this period was around 50 years. And something that you'll see as I go through this is how technology has infiltrated along the way. So at that time, typewriters was the main technological device. And early telephones started to make their way into workspaces and environments. And then you have 1950 to 1980. So I call this the corporate boom and mid-century innovation. So this period of time, now the skyscrapers have all been built. And you've got to think across Europe, they're rebuilding from the war. And so there's a lot of new innovative ideas that started to present themselves. And think Mad Men. I'm sure people remember that. But also in this period, there's so much innovation happened in this period. Xerox copiers came out, mainframe computers, credit cards, TV, all of these things were invented in that period, that 30-year period. So you had this resurgence of creativity, and the office started to reflect that, as I mentioned with Mad Men. And then you have what I call the rise of the machine. So this is 1980 to 2000. Personal computers, early email, fax, dial-up internet, all became synonymous with working in that period. And the famous or infamous cubicle was the main vision that we saw from the office. And some spaces still have cubicles, which is astounding to me, but hey. And then you have 2000 to 2020. So I call this the co-working and flex era. And I know flex is a disturbing word at times, but the technology of that time is synonymous: laptops, broadband, Wi-Fi, cloud computing, phones, smartphones. And I think as you'll notice, what's happening here, time is compounding and the amount of technology is pounded on top, right? And history shows us as technology evolves, so does the nature of how we all work, whether it's AI bots to record conferences or different devices working from home, hybrid, etc. And then that brings us to the hybrid work era. So I put question marks as to when this period will end, because I don't really know. But I call it the hybrid work era, the final frontier. Why? Because we have AI now, AI productivity tools, asynchronous workflows, which is simply, no one needs to work 9 to 5 anymore. You can be productive at different hours across a day. Zoom calls, team calls, all of these things are now normal for us all. And who knows how long that will last. So then you might be thinking, what about the future, right? What's the next generation of co-working? Please, Dean, tell me. And during creating this presentation, I couldn't help but think of some Uncle Warren Buffett wisdom, that there are nobody's predictions that I am personally interested in, even my own. And so here we are, halfway through a decade which began in crisis. And today we're at this crossroads and all of the noise surrounding the return to office mandates. Yet, when you scratch beneath the surface of it all, or you read some of the memos that come from some of the big CEOs, everyone seems to be saying the same thing. And I'm going to test this now. This is a live demo. What do you guys think the next generation of co-working or the office more broadly should be? And just throw out words. Anyone? Healthy? Collaborative? Someone said connected? Social? I can barely hear you. Okay. Fun. Oh yeah, cool. Yeah, fun. Okay. Sustainable. So there are loads of different words, but I think, and when you read, as I said, a lot of these memos, you start to learn that everyone's kind of saying the same thing, but using different adjectives to describe it. And it's this symbol for connection, creativity, and collaboration, something you mentioned. But before we realize that dream workspace where it's the utopia of everybody's connected and everybody's having fun, we must ask ourselves, what is work? And I'm sharing all of this with you guys because it's important to have context around why we're creating these spaces that you all create and all manage. And as I mentioned earlier, technology is the major disruptor here. Knowledge work, as we know it, can happen anywhere. And so to rethink the concept of work itself and reimagine it, we need to go a little bit further. So in my view, today work is hybrid. Work doesn't happen in one place, right? it's a series of moments throughout your day. So, for example, some of you may have, in the break, took a phone call. I'd ask the question, are you working? Probably. When you have a meeting, are you working? Probably. If you are in a bar having a drink with a potential investor or a team member, are you working? Probably. Because work doesn't need to happen in the confines of the spaces that we've all been trained to work in. As I said, that is a 20th century view. So in other words, work is like a third space activity. So I developed a strategy to help us think through and iterate, and hopefully that will lead to the future of co-working. I call it Momnts. So this is a design strategy to help amplify the user experience in your spaces. So I met a few of you just in the break, and one of the comments, I'm gonna put you on blast a little bit here, was, oh, I've got a couple spaces and I wanna unify them by having similar wallpaper, something to that effect. And the idea around making your space have a particular look and feel, as I said at the beginning, is merely table stakes. It's just a start. You have to go a little bit further, I think. And I'm here to share with you some of my experience across 12 years at how you can do that, okay? So you want to amplify the moments throughout your day. And there are 3 problems that I think we need to try and think through, okay? Number 1, create purpose for your environment. Whatever the subsector of real estate, we all need people and activity in order to drive utility, which is what drives the value of your space, period. So finding ways to get people back without force has got to be our number 1 priority. Number 2, provide space efficiency, not solely measured by the desk. Now, this is a tough one because we all understand the unit economics and how to price our spaces. And I'm not saying we need to get rid of that, but we need to move beyond that. How can we diversify the revenue streams in your space? So, and forgive me if I don't get everyone's name right, but I think it was Bobby who spoke at the beginning, and she spoke about the different wellness ways that you can integrate into your co-working. I would go a little bit further on top of that and say, yes, let's do that, but how can you monetize it? Okay, how can you turn those into a big part of your revenue stack and not just a service that you offer to people? Because in my view, gone are the days where, you do happy hour and you hope people turn up. It has to go further. COVID changed all of that. So you have to extend the utility of your environment. So there was a lot of conversation in the gentleman who was speaking about this amazing venue spoke about how to flip the space, how to change the space. So with all of your workspaces, you have to start to think what your space can do in the evening. How can you make your space make money 24 hours a day? A simple example is a bar. And I know some traditionalists may scoff at the idea of having a bar in a quote unquote workspace, but the point that I've been trying to make to you all is work is the office is stuck in a 9-to-5 trade, and the world doesn't work like that anymore. And then finally, a problem that we want to try and tackle is how do we enhance experience? Because if you have happier people, that will drive the culture. And driving the culture will drive the flywheel, which will create purpose for your space. And that's just the demand side, right? On the supply side, if you can get the space efficiency right, you then can offer more utility. So your space might be a workspace during the day, but it's a wine bar at night. But the wine bar isn't an afterthought. It's integrated holistically into your business strategy. Yes, you might not be experienced in restauranting or running bars or running wellness clubs, whatever the case may be, but the point is find a way to do it. But how? So I'm going to show you how we can use the Moment strategy to think through some of this to design your space. And this diagram is an adapted version of UI and UX design. So any of you who developed a product for, say, your workspace, maybe an app or anything, you've probably used a version of this diagram. And during my time at WeWork in the early days, before co-working and flex were buzzwords, and it had no real formal identity and there was no established product as there is today, we spent countless hours in meeting rooms, deconstructing what we did not like about the office. Because that was our number one goal. We said, offices suck, let's improve them. That was what we wanted to do from a product standpoint. And we began deconstructing ideas we didn't like and taking the things that we needed, a desk, a task chair. And we started to then rebuild the whole thing in our quote unquote image and what we thought was cool, whether it was certain artwork or certain types of furniture or certain music or certain ways we would treat people as a community manager. And it was a mix between these three areas. So you have business strategy. You got to think, at that time, we're a startup. So the business strategy was constantly evolving. Like some of your businesses, you're moving all the time. You're not quite sure exactly who you're serving and how you're going to scale. And then you have the look and feel. So whether it's the app, the website, your brand. And in between that was the brand experience. And then you have on the user experience side, you had this research and development. So you were constantly trying to think, who are the people that are going to use our space? Because I'm sure you all appreciate, you don't know exactly everyone who's coming into your environment. So you need to kind of create a persona. And we used to do all of these exercises to develop the ideal person we were speaking to. And in between that, because it's probably a little bit small on the screen, you have user experience and look and feel, but you had the user touch points. So we spent a lot of time researching, a lot of time developing, a lot of time thinking about how the brand would be perceived, and a lot of time about how people will really use the space. What would they do? A small story is, I call it the milk fridge story. It's a little bit trivial, but I kid you not, there was a conversation for my project in Boston, funny enough, where we debated where the milk fridge should go in the pantry for about an hour and a half. It was a circular conversation, and we were talking, and so what we would do, we would take conventional wisdom, so the kitchen triangle, which says you should move around the kitchen in a certain way. So we would take that, and then we would say, yeah, but how do we want our members to experience this? So for example, imagine if you go in, and at the time we were doing a lot of drip coffee. I'm sure some of you will have like fancy baristas and bean to cup coffee machines, but it was just drip coffee then. So imagine if you have your milk fridge directly under the coffee machine. And we were like, yeah, but that's not gonna work, because in the morning people are getting their coffee, people are trying to get into the milk fridge. That's a clusterfuck. And we would have this conversation. We never really solved anything. And in the end, sometimes now I go into spaces and I see the milk fridge underneath the coffee machine. I'm just like, oh yeah, how many people are having this conversation? And I'm telling you this story because it was symptomatic of how we thought about design. And I learned the power of thinking about your workspace design beyond the look and feel, beyond just the desk. You got to consider it. It's got to be a product, okay? It's got to be a product first. And it's a form of operational design, right? Where cross-functional teams and all your experiences and insights and reference points all come together to build a product that you then serve to the world. Why does this matter? Because co-working operators, as I said, and you guys would appreciate, you don't know who exactly your audience is when you first start. So in order to create a brand, you need to develop a persona that people can start to attach their emotional value to. And that's how it starts. Because without this foundation, it's kind of like the blind leading the blind. So I thought I would put this all to the test. And I said to myself, what if we created a juicy co-working space? And I was going to try and make this a super live workshop, but I kind of answered all the points myself as an example, but feel free to throw any comments that you may have as I go through this. So the first thing to do is to acknowledge that the Momnts approach, that I call it, is a distillation of everything we've been talking about, the history of the office, the fact that technology is the main driver here, not spatial design, look and feel. Those things are merely outputs from the technology changes. So it's a combination of activity-based working. So what is the function that needs to happen in that particular space? I don't know, you might need to laptop work. It might need to be heads down work. We were in Work Bar yesterday and the guys were talking about the different neighborhood models. So effectively, that's activity-based design, where you design a space, you organize a space around a particular function that you want to happen. But the next part is you layer in these curated hospitality moments. And these are like the operation. Think of that like the software, and that the physical space, the activity-based design, is like the hardware. And it's these two things together that will make your product. So how do you do it? Secondly, you need a series of inputs. So you start with your company. So in this case, it's Juicy, and I lifted from the website, Liz, to bring people together to connect, inspire, and educate. And then you have your people. Who are the people that you're trying to serve? In this case, I thought co-working operators, real estate professionals, creators such as myself delivering content, and then local businesses. And then what's your culture? How do you want to behave? And I thought a good one would be community first. Is that about right? Community first, kind of like a melting pot of different ideas, because you all flew in from different parts of the country or the world to be here today. So kind of like a summer camp. And then finally, what's your work style? So for me, it was like tech for streaming, and I was like production studios, and I was thinking this through, and then large spaces for events. And then you use all of this information to program the physical space. So this is when the kind of fun starts, the real design. And these four, based on my experience, most co-working spaces, most offices, period, are organized around these four programming zones. So you have the welcome area, a reframe space, which is basically spaces where you wouldn't do any typical quote unquote work. So that could be wellness, for example. And then you have connect spaces where you meet in real life or you meet digitally. And then you have create spaces where traditionally you would do work. So I started to think about the different space types that you may need in these particular zones. So this is the welcome area. So concierge, I thought barista, and guest lounge. Then in the reframe space, I was like self-serve kitchen, cocktail bar, well-being. So all of the things that you kind of come to expect. In the connect space, present space like this, phone booths, because if you want to break out and take those phone calls, conversation rooms, classrooms. And you keep going through, and you all might do this with your product itself, and you build out the stack, if you like. And then I want to remind you of this. And I wonder, and this is like a show of hands, did any of you guys notice the white rabbit and the book reference before when I showed this slide? I think I've got one nodded head. I've got another one head. That's good. You guys were really grasping the slide. So that book is Unreasonable Hospitality. Show of hands, has anybody read it? Okay, good. A lot of you have read it, but a lot of you haven't read it. So it's by Will Gadara, and he talks about how you can go that extra mile with your hospitality to enhance your space. Because if we remember what I said, no one really knows what the next generation of co-working is, including me. But what I do know is that if you can inspire those moments, which are the daily interactions that you have with your people, and if you can go and enhance those, there's no limit but your imagination in order for you to really develop your brand. Because, as I said, we might not know exactly what the future may hold, but if you do that, you might just create a space that is a product first and is memorable. So what I decided to do was make some visuals of what I thought the Juicy campus could be. But I didn't really have that much time. So as you can imagine, I thought I would end my presentation right back at the beginning. So I fed all that data back into Midjourney. And this is what it created. Liz, I would love to see if you approve of some of these designs. So this is the Juicy campus created by Midjourney. I promise you, I kept saying, make the logo lowercase, but it wouldn't budge. And that was some of the best ones. These are some of the worst ones. And now I may not have conclusively told you guys exactly what the next generation of co-working is, because frankly speaking, I don't know. But what I do know is that if you continue to iterate and improve the offering that you have for your customers and your members, you may just stumble upon it yourself. And I took great comfort from the fact that these images, from a creative standpoint, will probably keep me in a job for a little bit longer. So I have a bit more time to figure out what the future may hold. And with that, that's my time. And if you could scan this and give me some feedback, it will just take you to like a contact form and give me some feedback. I'll be more than happy to send you a version of this PDF so you can have it and share it with your teams, your friends, and whoever. But all I ask in return is if you could just give me some feedback. And then one last thing from me, which I'm going to enlist the help of the team. I had one more story. Are you guys familiar with Haribo? Right. So did you know that Haribo is produced differently here in the States than it is in Europe? Right. So in Europe, in Germany, it's produced in a certain type of way, and in the UK. But over here, unfortunately for you guys, they pile a bunch of sugar in it, and which I think is crazy because they are sweets. So I thought that I would bring some Haribos from the UK for you all so you can have a taste of a sweet without too much sugar in it. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
You're welcome.